So for the last 5 years, I've been working in government, and I think nobody is more surprised than me. I used to work as a journalist, a documentary filmmaker, a curator, and a visual artist. And in many ways, I think if there was one place that was completely devoid of imagination for me, not only in terms of what it produced for the world, but what it produced in me, was government. So when the mayor of Mexico City approached me and offered that I could actually invent a city department from scratch, to be honest, I thought it was just going to be a speculative exercise where I'd say, like, what would you do if suddenly the mayor of Mexico City, one of the largest cities in the world, and my fascination since I'm very young, suddenly says you can do whatever you want. Invent anything, it just has to have participation in mind. And so basically the result was Laboratorio para la Ciudad, which is officially the experimental arm / creative think tank of the Mexico City government, reporting directly to the mayor. And you might probably know that there's been a wave since the last 17 years of government labs popping up across the world. And basically, even though we're very different and very much brainchilds of the cities that we're from, we do have something in common, which is trying to create a space where people, government, can experiment without putting the rest of the system at risk. So basically, we mitigate risk for new ideas to be tested, for new things to be tried out. And in a certain sense, this scheme was what brought me into government. A talk that I had before I said yes to the mayor with a friend of mine basically offered up this thing where we really need to be thinking about government, because talk about broken design. Government has been the response and the answer that humanity has given to first principles. How will we move together? How will we live together? How do we want to play together and be healthy together? And the questions were solid. We just need to reimagine the answers, I think, with new details and new information out there. So this is the team at Laboratorio para la Ciudad. It's a motley crew, 20 people, more or less age 29, which is also the average age of Mexico City. And half of my team comes from fields that you'd imagine within government, but are actually scarce in the Mexico City government, which is urban geographers, data analysts, civic tech experts, political scientists, social scientists. And then exactly the other half comes from the creative field. So yes, designers, and yes, artists, and yes, filmmakers, and yes, activists, and historians, and editors, and writers, and journalists. So in many ways, it's trying to bring back the humanities into this thing of thinking about cities, because that is what Laboratorio para la Ciudad thinks about. You know, what do we want in terms of the city? What are the questions that we should be asking the city, and how can the city answer back? So this is definitely what gives us our flavor. This is Mexico City. For the people that have not been, it's 21 million people in the metropolitan area, 9.5 million people city proper, with about 6 million people coming in every day. So I was mentioning yesterday, just one of our subway stations move 1 million people. The subway system as a whole moves about 5 million. So everything is superlatives, and there's a vast diversity of resources that I think we have not necessarily used in the best of ways and means, but that same diversity where you can find anything and everything you want in this space is also what brings about inequality and what brings about huge social and economical division. So how do we deal with this? How do we enter the city? How do we even start thinking about this? The lab's place in a 280,000 bureaucratic system is about this. It's about thinking about the urban, the political, the social, the creative, the tensions and the translations, and basically trying to figure out how do we have language become part of the social and urban realities that we create? How do we take something like a law, or how do we take something as a concept, I'll explain in a second, and actually bring it into city life and to work with the micro-territories where we can actually make reality malleable once again, which is, I think, what cities and design have in common. So we very much work in the gaps, the conversations that are not being had, the disciplines that are not present, the citizens that had not wanted to engage with government and try to become a strange attractor for government to attract these people. Because I do think that there's a huge paradox that we're seeing in Mexico City, but I think this is worldwide, where on one hand, we're losing complete trust in our democratic systems, complete trust in our institutions, and this is incredibly true in Latin America. But at the same time, I've never seen in my life so many people wanting to engage with the city in and of itself, so many people wanting to actually propose and to create and to just like come together to think about things. So how can we rethink government? How can we redesign this space for government to become a lot less about only services and only complaints, but rather also a place that can catalyze citizen talent. And that becomes the institutionalized form of that social energy that can link up with political will. So this is the rooftop of Laboratorio para la Ciudad. From the very beginning, we tried to embody the ethos that we love. And so this government building, which actually houses 4,000 civil servants, including myself, is also a space, an in-between space where we come together, like everybody from the mayor to many ministers, we put together with citizens. And it's not only about complaints and not only about services, but actually about ideas and debates and having amazing people such as Perry Chen and Paola Antonelli and a whole series of really wonderful people that I don't know if any government building, at the very least in Mexico, has ever seen such a parade of brilliant minds helping us think about the city. So it's a good lab. We work in experiments, and we've done everything from passing laws. Of course, you get a creative team to work on this, and they become dynamic laws. Crowdsourcing the Mexico City Constitution, which ended up being quite paradigmatic worldwide. The Uber versus taxi debate that after France, Mexico was the most violent, actually got spelled out in the rooftop that you just saw, and we created a whole new methodology to deal with this. So in many ways, I think this holding space between disciplines, which has been really painful but super interesting, is how do we deal with the different visions of the city? How do we think about the objective topographies? Yes, but how do we bring in the social imaginaries as well? We are creatures of meaning, and we have forgotten it. We are visceral, and we have also forgotten it. And really think about the symbolic infrastructure of cities as well and how we intervene in there. So, you know, urban geography department, more than 200 maps. Yes, let's understand the data and the social realities, but reality is malleable. So how do we also think about urban imaginaries by surveying 31,000 people to figure out how they think about the city? What is the subjective city that lives in people's heads? And how do we also engage with that? So now we can actually create data across 1,400 neighborhoods and see it by gender, age, neighborhood, and figure out what that subjective city is like, as well as what is the future that we're imagining, which is mostly dystopic. Is that something that government should deal with, our dystopic notions of the future? I think it is. So how do we deal with this? We do everything from creating road safety plans, because there were huge looming gaps before we got to experimental stuff. But we also closed down for the very first time the elevated highways of Mexico City for pedestrian and bike use. So this becomes also an embodied way of talking about what we mean, which is a little bit, again, dealing with this infrastructure. This is when the mayor signed with 5 of Mexico City's main universities for AI data-driven purposes. So, you know, the very serious cerebral stuff where we have amazing people, and somebody in the audience actually from the tank that I didn't know was going to be here, people working in AI, but with an ethos that we think benefits Mexico City, such as being able to work with the informal bus, with the bus system that actually feeds the periphery, and using AI for the most marginalized communities. This is what we think is Mexico City's place in this conversation. But at the same time, again, we go to the other side. We're also engaging for the first time, sitting down all of the design universities in Mexico, both public and private, that for the very first time in their history are talking about the future of design and how we can actually create new roles for designers and the types of worlds that we want to live and really amplify their possibilities in it. So, you know, we've been doing air quality monitoring, AI, super interesting. Mexico City was one of the first to start air quality, but we didn't have dynamic readings nor pedestrian level. So this is a team of people that were doing more business side, but prompted by a call for proposals, are now working on social issues, such as really cheap monitoring on a local level that is being integrated back into the system. But we also love working with artists such as Gilberto Esparza, which created this nomad plant. This really works. Like, it looks like a magical creature, and it is. But so it has hydrophiliac legs. It moves towards rivers. It takes for granted that rivers will be polluted, so it can actually purify the water, feed the plant in turn feeds the robot, and if a human tries to approach it, it runs away. So it, you know, designed for survival, if you will. And this has become not only like an amazing feat of symbiosis between the machine and the plant, but also a fantastic way of talking to communities and children about the implications of polluting the river. Like this, you can have empathy towards. This, it becomes a conversation prompter that could lead to other realities. language into the urban. The right to the city is just up in our new Mexico City Constitution that has me incredibly excited. And the right to the city under human rights, legal terms, is basically whoever you are, be it that you're a 3-year-old or a single mother or a transsexual or somebody that wants to have euthanasia, the city should actually be for you. In terms much more philosophical and much more idealistic, if you will, we can go back to Henri Lefebvre and David Harvey and all of these that basically say, you know, the ultimate right to the city is to be able to imagine a city and then make it come true, because in a way, first we create cities and then the cities create us. And I'd say in terms of this particular conferences, the way that we break our cities are the way that our cities are gonna end up breaking humankind and daily life, so we need to beware. So this is where we need to play out the right to the city, and we need to translate it into this. With the Urban Geography Department, that it's the first time that Mexico City has doing spatial analysis from the lab, we can now suddenly find out that Mexico City has 5 million kids metropolitan area. But then we have Iztapalapa that has 500,000 amount of kids, and others that have almost none. So when we start talking about the city that we want on spatial justice, we can start mapping this out and seeing, for example, with this tool that we created, we cross-reference this with the access to open or green space, which Mexico City, some neighborhoods have more than 52 square meters of public space that is greener than any green city. But other places, such as Iztapalapa, with 500,000 kids, have less than 3 square meters when the UN actually asked for 9. So how do we go for the specific places? How do we start working? How do we take into account that our city is the first botanical garden in the whole continent, and 3 times larger than Central Park? But it's also this. Informal neighborhoods, Mexico City, 60% self-built, and hence greenery was not necessarily worked in. So besides working with the urban planning department and now having for the first time a long-term view on the city that we want, bringing back to life the right to the city, but also the right to play that is also inscribed in one of our laws, we are also thinking about the governance and the state-of-the-art of public playgrounds in Mexico City. So on one hand, we now have a new governance model, but now we're also doing this exploration of new typologies of why are we making playgrounds so boring? Are there other ways of doing this? And taking places like this, but also adding the children, because we think that there's a huge underutilized resource there, and putting them together with architects and designers, creating new tools so that they can also be part of policy, and creating call for proposals such as Juguetes Urbanos, that just had, this is our last intervention, completely intense. I won't get into it, but it's so fascinating to see. This is super intense space with homeless, drug dealers, poor neighborhood, like all of these, because I forgot to say the other map also crosses and indexes social inequality, and hence many of these places are also some of the most violent in Mexico City. And these places are coming to completely alive with these urban interventions that we find very interesting. Meanwhile, we do more permanent things. We're also creating play streets that have a really interesting community component and are bringing neighborhoods that don't necessarily have a very easy way to communicate amongst them out into the streets. And the happy news of last week is that we're now actually gonna, in one of these places that has, the closest park is 30-minute walk away. We're creating the first permanent typology of play streets, we think, in the world. And hopefully this will start getting replicated across Mexico City as well. So last but not least, before I invite Stefano up here, one of the other things that Mexico City is very interesting, even though we're smack in the middle of Mexico, is that we also need to talk about borders. And this reminds me of the conversations, the first panel. Unfortunately, we have 3 airplanefuls of deportees coming into Mexico City, be they from Mexico City or not. So in a certain sense, borders is nature twice broken. First of all, this is a project by Pablo Lopez Luz, an amazing photographer that also took the first one. And he's been photographing the border between Mexico City and, between Mexico and the US. And it's one of the most transited borders and one of the largest borders in the world, and you know how problematic nowadays. So first of all, our imaginary constructs that have very real effects in society, but then also what happens with a human nature. One of the things that we worked on as well was Article 20 of the Mexico City Constitution, which is global city that includes sanctuary city. So everybody and anybody that is even in transit through Mexico City has the right to be there. And just as sanctuary cities in the US the ones that are going for that. You cannot be asked for papers. All of your human rights are intact. And the mayor of Mexico City has been working with mayors, from Mayor de Blasio, Garcetti, et cetera, on dealing with the Trump policy. So one of the things that we did was gang up with anthropologist Paulo Landa, and we've been doing workshops with several groups of deportees. Some of them are very tiny but nice. In terms of the airport, we figured out there's a special door called Puerta N that actually is only for deportees, and those 3 planes that I mentioned of deportees come handcuffed until 15 minutes before they arrive to Mexico City, completely dazed, some of them that have not even been in Mexico in 30 years, if ever, to Mexico City, actually, and they've been filling up these tiny spaces that kind of like hack the system where it's, you know, please respect the plants, and there it's please respect my rights, and they've been filling up the airport with these little messages. So this is a tiny thing. The more exciting thing, I think, is working with them, is we figured out that they are wearing T-shirts to welcome the deportees, and it's actually the deportees themselves that are welcoming the new ones in. And one really, really amazing collective called Deportados Unidos has been using design to hack the system. So it's really interesting because even though there's many groups, they've found a way through design to become visible to a certain constituency and to work themselves into the system. And through creating T-shirts and all sorts of things, deportacos and deportaguas, they've been not only gaining their own economical, earning money themselves, but also welcoming other people that are coming in, giving them jobs and helping them ease into the city. So basically, we've been putting together designers as well as other people, and have now created something that is going to be going up on Kickstarter very soon, and hopefully everybody will support, of just saying how can we create solidarities between designers and these newcomers, both to Mexico City as well as to design. And one of the objectives is actually to create a house of deportees. So this is them, and this is another way of thinking about the right to the city. And that is the end.
All right.